So, well, actually, let me put it back over there. All right, let's get started with a prayer, y'all. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, thank you for gathering us here together this evening. I pray that the Astros stay safe and that they win tonight. I ask that um, this class go well, or this session go well, rather, and that if any confusion comes up, that you might help clear it up. We ask this in your name. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Okay, guys. So, just so you know, I am recording these sessions from now on. So, if you miss one, you can go to the SMLJ Youth Ministry YouTube page and find them. So, the previous session is actually on the YouTube page where we cover abortion specifically. But today we're going to cover the other pro life issues because being pro life is about more than being against abortion and being for birth and for women. So, but to recap last week, so that way we at least have a good foundation to build on here. Long story short, abortion is bad. Like, it's literal murder, so please don't. But the way that we're going to combat abortion is by getting rid of the reasons people have said that they seek abortions. Reasons like poverty, lack of education, lack of financial or familial support. And then the last point was that if we're going to talk the talk, we need to walk the walk. And by that, I mean that you need to be an advocate if you're going to talk the talk here. And that means helping pro-life women's organizations help women out of poverty so that way, having a baby doesn't financially ruin them. Or at the very least, so they know they have said support. Again, if you want to see that full session, it's on the SMLJ YouTube page. Feel free to watch it. It is a good time. But with that, let's move on to other pro-life issues. So today we're going to cover three. We're going to cover euthanasia, capital punishment, and immigration/refugees. So first and foremost, what's euthanasia? Adriana, Diego, what do y'all say? What's euthanasia?
I don't know what euthanasia is.
All right.
Isn't that where they put people, like, they give them medicine so they can die or something? Like they do it to dogs and cats
Right,
and
right,
animals?
right. Yeah.
Isn't that the
So
same thing?
yeah. So basically, euthanasia is quote unquote mercy killing, um, and it's pronounced youth in Asia. All right, that it doesn't look like euthanasia because it starts with an E, but youth in Asia. Uh, Oxford defines euthanasia as the painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease or in an irreversible coma. The practice is illegal in most countries. All right, so that's what Oxford says. That's what the secular world says. This is what the Catechism says. Whatever its motive and means, direct euthanasia consists in putting an end to the lives of handicapped, sick, or dying persons. It is morally unacceptable. All right, you can find that pretty plain as day in the Catechism when it talks about this. And naturally, that raises the question, where does the pro-life stance land in all this? Basically, call you back to the main principle of the pro-life position, which is that human beings have an inherent dignity that needs to be respected at all stages of life, from conception to natural death. All right? We're called to respect human life. And if we don't respect human life near the end, things get messy and immoral and not good. So where does the line get drawn with this, right? The phrase I often hear whenever I talk to folks that work in this particular area of pro-life advocacy is the goal is to prolong life without prolonging death. The Catechism clarifies this as well. Discontinuing medical procedures that are burdensome, dangerous, extraordinary, or disproportionate to the expected outcome can be legitimate. It is the refusal of overzealous treatment. So in these situations, this would be something like, let's say this person is in the hospital and they have an incurable condition where they have 1 week to live tops. All right. But they could do treatment to maybe make that 2 weeks. But 2 weeks would be the hard cap. This is saying that it's okay if the patient doesn't want to accept that treatment to extend their life by that extra week. But that doesn't mean that the hospital should have the right to deny that treatment to the patient if they want it, right? So if the patient wants to keep prolonging their life, then that's their prerogative, right? But in this situation, it would be perfectly fine if they said, you know what, an extra week isn't going to make that much of a difference. You know, basically what it's saying is the potential cost and risk of that surgery, because every surgery is risky, to extend the life by such a small amount is not proportionate to the risk, right? And this, you often see this in cases of DNRs, which are do not resuscitate orders, or like I was saying, not seeking further treatment of a terminal condition and letting the life end naturally. That is perfectly fine and licit. All right. The problem comes in that because there's that fuzziness, people take it too far to the wrong extreme. This has been used to justify euthanizing patients who maybe could extend their life by months or years with a treatment that's risky, and doctors not allowing them to go along with it for a number of reasons. So these are the situations that pro-lifers fight against, right? The notion that a life of inconvenience is... Sorry, let me back up. Rephrase that. Pro-lifers fight against the notion that a life of inconvenience is not a life worth living. I phrased it wrongly there. And this also is what's used to justify what's called assisted suicide, right? Some people would look at euthanasia as assisted suicide. It is not the same thing, but there have been cases, and Andy can probably speak to this as well. There's a pretty popular case about 5-6 years ago of this woman who was diagnosed with, I think, terminal brain cancer, and the doctors gave her a year to live, and she decided that she was instead going to seek assisted suicide and euthanize herself instead, so that way she could quote unquote go out on her own terms. And the culture, like secular culture, really celebrated this, right? As, oh, she's so brave for, you know, going out on her own terms and this and that and all that. Here's the problem with that line of thinking is you end up getting into lots of situations where people aren't like that, where they don't want to pass away like that. There have been lots of cases where insurance companies, so like your medical insurance, won't pay for the sort of medication or treatment you need to continue your life substantially whenever the patient does. And because of that, the hospital can't afford to keep the treatment going, and therefore the patient dies as a result of that. All right? This is what you might hear referred to as an instance of the quote-unquote culture of death. All right? And essentially the culture of death is making it more difficult for people that want to live to actually live when they're faced with these sorts of hardships, right? So the subject of euthanasia is very nuanced, but in general, the pro-life position is that euthanasia violates human dignity, right?
Right. And just to add in, Adam, yeah, I remember that case. And just to throw in also, before you guys were born in the 90s, there was a huge thing in the media about this Dr. Jack Kevorkian.
Oh, yeah.
Who specialized in all this stuff, you know, in euthanasia. And he came under heavy fire, and it was a big media hoopla.
Well,
but
he got arrested for it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. I think, I don't know if he ever remember if he's still alive or not, but
yeah.
And to that point, this isn't as, to me anyway, it's not as cut and dry as abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because these people are suffering and their families don't want to see them suffer anymore. Not that, don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of this at all. I'm just, saying that there's a lot, it's not as cut and dry as abortion.
Yeah.
It really isn't. And that's why
Yeah.
it's so, it's a messy, it's a messy topic, basically.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I included this bit here, right? If there's one thing you remember about euthanasia, remember this phrase. The goal is to prolong life without prolonging death. Okay? And each instance of somebody who's terminal is a case-by-case basis. But basically the guiding principle should be, if this person wants to live, then they should be allowed to live. And they shouldn't be cut off from being allowed to live because of financial or arbitrary hospital decisions, right? And they should be... And the other thing is that you should seek to have a natural death and not an artificial one, right? So passing away naturally instead of something like assisted suicide. Because again, what this ends up doing is a slippery slope of making it be where it's more valuable to die the right way than to live an inconvenient way. And that is dangerous territory. Horribly dangerous territory. So avoid euthanasia. That's the long and short of it. So moving on to issue number 2. Capital punishment. When do y'all think it's justified? And, just to be clear, capital punishment is the death penalty, right? So when do y'all think it's justified? Let's hear it.
For murder and rape.
Okay, murder, rape. Adriana?
Like if you're a serial
box.
No.
A serial killer?
Like if you're a serial or rapist. Like I feel like those people you can either put them in a facility where they can't get out anymore and eventually that to me is inhumane.
So, have y'all ever heard of the term eye for an eye?
Yep.
Oh yes.
That's what a lot of people see the death penalty as.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I see it, honestly. I mean, I know it's not right. I know someone shouldn't take the life of another
It
person.
depends why they kill them.
I mean, murder.
Because if somebody walks in your house and they have a gun, like, pointing at one of your siblings, you should shoot them first before they kill your baby sister or something.
That's not capital punishment.
Yeah.
That's not capital punishment.
Yeah.
That's completely different.
Murder is wrong. Period.
Sorry.
I know, but like,
Capital punishment
Period.
is
Wrong.
capital punishment is the death penalty.
That guy?
This is when somebody is sentenced to death.
yeah, but if you murder somebody because they were threatening to kill somebody like close to you, you shouldn't be put to death because you're protecting them.
Well, that's not murder.
Yeah, that's self-defense, and a lot of people.
Yeah. So killing, not all killing is murder, guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
Like
all.
you get injected with
Really not how they kill you.
Not all killing is murder. Not all killing is murder. But and in that situation, like Andy said, it would be self-defense, or they might even say that it's third-degree manslaughter or something like that. But it wouldn't be murder, which would be one of the reasons the state would issue a death penalty. So, trainers, y'all came in a little late. We talked about euthanasia before. I'm recording this session, so y'all can go back and watch this whenever I put it up on YouTube. But we're on capital punishment now. So tell me, what do y'all think justifies capital punishment, which is the death penalty?
Mass murder.
Mass murder. Okay. And are you by yourself there, Matthew? Or are your siblings with you? I can't see. Okay. All right. Cool. So yeah, that's a pretty common response, and the state, whenever it dishes out the death penalty, tends to be cases of egregious first-degree murder, which, for those of you who don't know, legally first-degree murder is defined as premeditated. So, like, the person had the plan to kill the person before they went and killed the person. or instances of serial murder or whatnot. But what does the church say? The Catechism states that the goal of judicial punishment is rehabilitation, right? And the death penalty, by its nature, prevents rehabilitation. Therefore, it is not in alignment with the goal of judicial punishment. So, what does that mean? Basically, what the Catechism is saying is the goal of jail shouldn't just to be punish people and keep them away from society. It should be keep them away from society and rehabilitate them so that way they can come back into society and be productive members of society, right? That's the goal. Let me get rid of steam real quick before it bugs me. And when you kill somebody with the death penalty, they can no longer be reintegrated back into society. But the Catechism does also say that capital punishment is permissible in cases where the offender cannot be safely kept away from society to rehabilitate. What does that mean? Keep in mind that whenever the church is saying a teaching, they're thinking globally. They're not just thinking U.S., right? So the teachings that they give for the church in the United States has to apply to the mission in South America. It has to apply to the mission in the remote village in Africa. It has to be able to apply to the penguins in Antarctica. Well, probably not the penguins, but if people lived in Antarctica, it would have to apply to them as well, right? And basically what it's saying is if you don't have a good enough jail system to keep these people who are violent and unable to be safe members of society, then capital punishment is permissible then. However, we are in the United States. And in the United States, prisons have good enough security to keep prisoners in check. Therefore, there's no reason within the U.S. judicial system, according to the Catholic Church, for the death penalty to be permissible because, what's it called? Here, hold on. There we go. Because life in prison accomplishes the same goal. Some other notes. Forensic science is constantly improving, all right? Numerous death row inmates were found innocent after forensic science advanced enough where the evidence from their case was able to prove or disprove their involvement in the crime. Lots of these happened whenever DNA evidence got good enough for us to verify somebody being there. And it's happening still these days. Not necessarily with DNA, but, confession time. Your boy watches Forensic Files, which is some quality entertainment, I must say. And for those of you who don't know, Forensic Files is a 30-minute show. It documents a case of a crime or an instance where forensic science solved the case in a unique way. And we're talking, sometimes it's obscure stuff like the particular bacteria from the particular pond where the crime scene happened match the bacteria that was found on the wet pants of one of the suspects, and they were able to prove that years later. Things like that happen all the time. Little advancements that end up having huge impacts. So, because of that, there have been cases where people who were killed in the death penalty were later proven innocent whenever forensic science advanced enough. And so getting rid of the death penalty would prevent innocent people from dying, which is the goal of pro-life people as a whole. Keep innocent people from dying. This note it kind of goes along with that the U.S. needs prison reform as a whole, according to the church. And the security to separate dangerous individuals is there. Again, that's what I was getting at earlier. And then this point, Andy was getting at it earlier. 2 wrongs don't make a right. It's not going to reverse the evil that a murderer did by killing them. It doesn't bring their victim back to life. So killing them would just dirty your own hands. To quote Batman, because Batman is a decent role model at least, if you kill a murderer, the amount of murderers in the world stays the same. So keep that in mind. Now let's talk about immigration. So when we talk about immigration, especially here in the context of the United States, nobody has issues with legal immigration, right? Whatever issues may come up would be with the immigration process, which is very long and very arduous. And overall, the pro-life position is that refugees should be easier to welcome, and that's again to uphold their human dignity. There are lots of cases where people are fleeing dangerous countries to come live in the U.S. or other countries around the world, so that way they can at least live safely. So why does this end up being controversial? Well, these days in the U.S. especially, it tends to focus on ICE and on Trump. I'm going to focus on ICE because, as far as I'm concerned, whenever Trump talks about immigration, he's really just stirring the pot. Like, very little can be said positively about what he says about immigrants and whatnot. So I'm not even going to go there. Just ignore Trump when it comes to these sort of things. It's not good what he says about immigrants. He says awful stuff. But ICE is the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Department. They're the ones who are in charge of people immigrating, and they're the ones who deport people who have immigrated illegally. Now, the reason why they have all these strict policies in place and why it takes so long for legal immigration to happen is because people have abused the immigration system in the past. And whenever somebody breaks a law, you got to tighten it up in order to close that loophole. And essentially, especially with the southern border, you got instances of gang members like the cartels who are involved in international drug trade, human trafficking, and other miscellaneous crimes, right? So any strict immigration law is trying to keep those dangerous individuals out of the United States. And it is perfectly licit within a country's power, per the catechism, per Catholic social teaching, to keep dangerous people out of your country. That's one of the reasons we have borders. However, calling for ICE to improve its practices are completely licit. It is completely fine and good to call for them to be better. A couple of years ago, y'all may remember this, Trump was catching a lot of flack because some images leaked to the media of an ICE facility near the border where they were housing people in between. And basically what happens is when people come to the border, not through the legal method, so if they come illegally, ICE detains them and they figure out who they are. They have to, because they're in a war with gang members. And there was lots of bad press, one of the things going around was ICE is separating families from each other within these facilities. And believe it or not, there's actually, the reason for that is, again, to prevent human trafficking. There were instances of cartel gang members trying to cross the border illegally with a couple of kids who they were trying to traffic. And then when they got caught, they said, "Oh, I'm their uncle," when really they weren't. So whenever they're separating them, they're doing a DNA test in order to verify that there's a relation. And then whenever they verify the relation, they put them back together. But anyway, I digress. This image leaked to the media, and it was a big media hailstorm, and everybody was calling on Trump being awful, and ICE needs to be abolished. And then it got revealed that that was a picture from the Obama administration and not from the Trump administration, so that got a little awkward. But ultimately, another thing that happened with that instance that I want to bring up to you guys is there was a furniture company that was in Texas. I forget where exactly, but they saw the images and they're like, "Oh, there are no beds for these people? Let's donate a bunch of mattresses." And they made a statement that we're going to donate X number of mattresses to ICE in order for them to be able to provide better comfort for the people who are in these holding facilities. And people just went nuts on this company on social media. So much so that the company ended up canceling their donation before it got sent. So you have this situation where ICE clearly needs to improve its situation. A third-party entity was like, "Hey, we can provide immediate support now," and then because of public backlash, they rescinded their gift of charity. as a pro-lifer, I look at that and I'm completely disgusted because there is a clear need to improve the dignity of these people who are being held while they're being verified, and it wasn't being met. Now, again, it's completely illicit to call for ICE to improve its conditions in there if they can. ICE doesn't get funded like the military does or education does. They don't have as big a chunk of the pie as they would like. I'm sure if they did, they would be able to improve their facilities. But for the interim, charity donations are what do the trick. So, again, as a pro-lifer, it's like we should have been supporting the immediate needs of the people there instead of trying to make political statements. So I was getting about this. I got a little ahead of myself. Again, the mattress donation thing. And another thing that pro-lifers call for when it comes to immigration is better methods of identifying safe illegal immigrants, right? I have tons of friends of Hispanic backgrounds who have told me straight up that their ancestors, their grandparents, or whoever who came to the U.S. originally were illegal. And it wasn't out of malice. It was straight up because they didn't know that there was a legal way to enter the U.S. And I think it is completely consistent with Catholic social teaching to be like, hey, let's advocate for better methods to identify illegal immigrants that are safe so that way they can stay here and immigrate, go from being illegal to legal. So that way there's no issue there. And then, like I was getting at earlier, make the path to citizenship easier. Because it takes well over a decade from somebody who immigrates legally from another country to the U.S. to become a full-fledged citizen. And there are reasons for that. You can debate how good those reasons are. I'm not going to right now because I don't think they're entirely great, personally. But again, path to citizenship should be made easier. So, overall, when it comes to these issues, it's euthanasia is bad, prolonged life without prolonged death, capital punishment shouldn't be happening in the U.S. because we have the facilities to keep people in jail for their life instead of killing them, which makes it difficult to rehabilitate. And then the immigration process in the United States should improve. And all of this is to uphold the dignity of the human person, which is the goal of being pro-life. All right, discussion time. What stood out today and why? Go ahead and unmute yourselves and let's chat. I hear someone unmuted.
Okay, well, I guess I'll go first.
All right, Andy, let's hear it.
I don't know, there are a couple of things. Number one, the immigration thing, I come from a background of, my grandfather came from Greece when he was a teenager, but he came through El Asylum.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, I'm not sure, she came from Mexico when she was a baby. And I can't remember if they came legally or not, but both of my maternal grandparents were immigrants. That kind of stood out. And also the euthanasia and the capital punishment. Hey, newsflash, we live in Texas, and capital punishment is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things, unfortunately, that Texas is known for, It's one of those stereotypes, like everyone rides a horse to work and, we support capital punishment. So, which is not true of either riding a horse to work or everyone's in favor of capital punishment. But and also, like I said, with the euthanasia, it's not a clear-cut case like abortion because you have all these parties wanting something, like the families don't want to see their family member in pain or suffering. So they consider it, even if for a moment they consider it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, those quite a bit stood out to me.
Gotcha.
This week.
Gotcha.
Sorry to
No,
keep going on, but
no, it's all good. Okay, next. Adriana, Diego, what are your thoughts?
Do you have any?
Nope.
Okay, well, mine are.
Say.
Well, say it bluntly.
I'm trying, but I don't have to say it. I don't agree with like some of the things.
For real?
Yeah,
Like what?
that's been said. Me personally, I don't agree with it.
Quit teasing her, Diego.
Like the euthanasia thing,
Exactly.
Okay.
because personally, I don't like seeing people in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that if I was in pain, or if like one of my family members were in pain, I don't think they would want to do this. So,
Right.
including you. If they were in pain, I don't really suspect that they would want to be in the pain continuously. So that's kind of. I feel like I would like end their suffering in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's not my decision to make.
I hope it never is.
But, I mean, that's what I would do. Same thing with the capital punishment. Like, man, I'm just, I don't know. It's just like I understand. Like family members, if someone died in your family because someone murdered them, of course they're gonna want to like kill them.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, you don't know the reason behind why the person was killed, so that's kind of
Yeah.
up in the air. So I know it's not right, but that's what I believe. So.
Right. And I understand, especially with the euthanasia thing, that tends to be one of the most interesting conversations you can have when talking about pro-life issues as a whole. Pro-life issues as a whole tend to be like, they go beyond party lines here in the U.S., right? Because you got the Republicans who were, very gung-ho against abortion, but then you got Democrats who are very gung-ho against capital punishment and are very for improving immigration. So you got pro-life aspects on both sides. But euthanasia doesn't really fall consistently on either side when it comes to those sort of things. So it's really difficult to kind of come to an understanding. And I will say that, just echoing what I said earlier, that the goal of the pro-life side of euthanasia is to prolong life without prolonging death, right? And it will be on a case-by-case basis, right? Your goal, if, God forbid you're ever in that sort of situation, according to church teaching, would be to make sure that, if this person can live longer in a reasonable way without it being an unnecessarily dangerous procedure to prolong their life, or that it would be a reasonable amount of life extension. So let's say, hey, we'll do this surgery and it'll give you another year to live, versus, hey, we do this surgery and it gives you like another 2 days, but both are equally as dangerous, and there's like maybe a 50% survival for the surgery. Then it'd be like, let's just not do the surgery. That would be a perfectly fine thing to do in, say, the 2-day case versus the 1-year case. But again, it would be on a case-by-case basis. Prolong life without prolonging death, because causing unnecessary suffering is a bad thing. It really is. So there you go. Prolong life, don't prolong death. Matthew, what do you got?
Well, straight out there, capital punishment. With that, I mean, yeah, you're supposed to, in the church's eyes, keep, keep people living as long as they can, even if they, do a crime or whatever. And maybe years later they find out they're innocent after being killed or whatever, but, since they didn't know that at the time, they had every right to, say, hey, this person's guilty of it. Even if the case is ongoing, they don't have any last-minute evidence to prove otherwise.
Mhm.
So, and then also all the people who are just kind of stuck in the prisons or whatever, going to be there for life. I mean, they're fighting for their life more than they were when they showed up. Whatever store they walked into, they're fighting, for their life. A lot more in prison than they were walking around, carrying illegal guns. So.
Or whatever crime it was they committed. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I listed that point about America needing prison reform as a whole. Every now and then I'll be on Facebook and I'll see somebody post something about how some other country does prisons. I think the last one I saw was Denmark. They showed a room in a prison, and it's not like iron bars and crappy beds and person looking all dull. It's just like a guy in fairly reasonable clothing. He has a desk, a comfortable bed, and a window to see the outside, and it's like a door to open it. And, the caption was, the goal in Denmark is to rehabilitate the prisoner, not punish them. And, that's what the Catholic Church advocates for. If I can just about guarantee you, if Pope Francis was to make a comment on the current state of the U.S. Judicial system, or not the judicial system, sorry, the U.S. prison system, he would not have nice things to say. It very much goes against what the ideal that the Catholic Church calls us for. And, since we're called to be pro-life, we are called to advocate for good prison reform, whenever the topic comes up. Now, that's the other side of it, right? I kind of touched on it in the last session 2 weeks ago, but abortion tends to be the main issue people talk about when they talk about pro-life issues. And admittedly, it is the most pertinent, right? And by logical reasoning, it is also like the most horrific, because it is the intentional killing of a baby, of an infant, of like literally the most innocent a human being could ever possibly be, versus, let's improve the conditions of people who have been found guilty already. And in some cases you have to decide, do I go with the candidate who is against abortion or the one who wants prison reform? And because of the way that the U.S. political system works, that is a tough call for a lot of folks. But yeah, it's a mess, guys. Being pro-life ain't easy. I'm not going to pretend like it ain't. But again, if it all comes from upholding human dignity. If you uphold human dignity, then all of this flows naturally from it. And that's the point. So anyway, let's move on. What other topics would fall under the pro-life umbrella and why? I'm not going to cover any more pro-life issues going forward in these weeks. So, if there's something else that falls under like the pro-life umbrella that you can think of, let's hear it now. Going once. Going twice. And sold. Okay. I'm guessing I covered it all. I'll take it. So, just closing stuff on that. Again, if you guys ever have any questions about anything of this nature, my office is always open. Feel free to come on down and we'll chat about it. Some of these questions are pretty tough, especially if there's a particular instance where it's like, but what about this and this and this and this? How do we apply these guiding principles to this particular situation? I can help you go through that. Or if it's other stuff, like theology questions or whatnot. But it's important to bring up pro-life issues when you're talking about theology of the body, because it all ties in together, right? It's all about upholding human dignity It's just different ways to apply that upholding of human dignity. If you recognize human dignity, then not only all the teachings of sexuality fall into place, but also all the teachings on how to handle the topics of abortion and euthanasia and capital punishment and immigration. So that's good. Last thing today, guys. I'm going to here. I'm gonna